Hi, fellow believers in Christ. Today, I just wanted to talk about some of the amazing mysteries in Genesis and the story of the creation, and some things that I've learned from it. Genesis is actually pretty strange, to say the least, but it's so beautiful. So in the second verse of chapter 1, it says, "The earth hath existed, waste and void." So this shows us that the earth was already in existence before the beginning of the Bible story, which means there was some sort of creation that occurred before the earth as we know it was created. Because our planet was here, but it was waste and void. It was a wasteland. Let's see. "And darkness is on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God fluttering on the face of the waters." There is a Bible verse somewhere that says that God exists in darkness, but then there are several verses that say there is no darkness in him. So there's a difference between existing in darkness and having no darkness in you. When darkness is in you, that's sin, and God has no sin. And he will not tolerate sin. He won't pollute himself with sin. And yet he exists in darkness. And so that's a mystery right there. And God said, "Let light be." Now this is day one when God said, "Let there be light." "And God seeth the light that it is good, and God separateth between the light and the darkness. And God calleth to the light day, and to the darkness he hath called night. And there is an evening, and there is a morning," day one. Now, God created light. Well, it didn't say he created light. It said, "Let there light be." And we know God is light. So obviously his light always existed before this story. But when he said, "Let there be light," did it mean let his light shine out onto this scene? Or did it mean let light appear in this scene of this void, waste earth? And but another thing to think about is the sun and the moon and the stars have not been created yet. This is day one. There's no sun, no moon, and no stars. And yet there is light, and there is a day, and there is a night. Day and night have been created. So go figure that one. Now, I have some things to say about that. For one thing, this prevents any and all form of sun worship. You know, the pagans today and the pagans of yesterday have always worshipped the sun. But there's no reason to worship the sun, because the sun doesn't bring us day. It can't. Day existed before the sun existed. Now you might say, how is that? I don't know how. I wish I did know. But there was day before there was sunlight. And there was light before there was sun. Now, light does come from the sun. It's an extra form of light, but it's not the only form of light. The first and foremost is God himself. And God himself shed light on our planet before he created the sun. So there's no reason to worship the sun. And we'll find another thing in here that shows us that there's no reason to worship the sun or to depend on it in any way. In fact, the sun depends on God. We do not depend on the sun. So now the next day. Now notice it also said an evening. And then morning, day one. This shows you that all days begin in the evening, and they do not begin in the morning. Again, it's another reason not to worship the sun, and I've talked about this before. But, you know, the sun worshipers wanted us to have church on Sunday, the day of sun worship, in the morning when the sun comes up. So the sun worshipers, now I'm not saying it's a sin to go to church Sunday morning. I go to church Sunday morning, so it's not a sin. But the idea of going to church on Sunday morning was invented by sun worshipers. Okay? But evening and the whole concept of a morning, of a day beginning in the morning, is false as well, because the sun does not usher in the day, because the day does not start in the morning, it starts in the evening. In all of these days it says evening and morning, day one. So the beginning of a day is evening, not morning. Now the proof of this also is found in the books of law, where God always commands the feasts to begin in the evening. Why? Because days begin in the evening. Now, why would God begin a day in darkness rather than light? Well, it reminds us of two things. Number one, our earth began in darkness and not in light. Number two, it gets our focus off of everything that we have created, because in darkness you cannot see man's creation, so that our focus is on him. You'll notice that Jesus Christ was also born at night. Most babies are born at night, but he was born at night, and the shepherds were told by the angels at night, and the shepherds came to Jesus in the night. The night is a time, and you'll also notice that baby Jesus was born outside of the city where all the lights were, all the torches and lights were in the city, to shed light on what man had created, man's buildings, man's inventions. But Jesus was born outside of the city, where it was a very natural setting. He was born in a cave, which God made. God made the cave, amongst animals that God made, out in the country that God made, under the stars that God made. You see, the whole setting was heavenly. It was all pointing to God, not pointing to, if he had been born in an inn on a nice comfy bed, it wouldn't have pointed to God like it did by him being born out in the country, and the shepherds and the sheep coming, and all the animals watching. So again, Jesus was born in darkness to get our focus on Jesus and not on all the distracting things that could have been around him in the light. And the Passover begins at night, Shabbat begins at night, every Jewish feast begins at night when the sun goes down, to get our focus off of the sun, which we do not worship, and to get our focus off of all the things that we have made, which we do not worship and depend on. So we don't depend on the sun or anything that we've made. Okay. And God said, this is the second day, let an expanse be in the midst of the waters, and let it be separating between waters and waters. Now, what does that mean? That means that originally, space, okay, this might shock some people, but there is a lot of evidence that space is actually water. It's not air, it's actually water. And the stars are in water. They're floating in water, basically. So I won't get into that because I'm not a scientist, and that would distract from what this is about. And you can look into it your own and decide on your own if you want to believe it. But that seems to be what the Bible is saying as well. There was the water. It was nothing but water around the earth. But then God made an expanse. Now that expanse today we would call sky. The Bible calls it heaven. It's a heavenly area. It's a heavens. Here it's called the heavens. In verse 7, and God maketh the expanse, and it separateth between the waters which are under the expanse. That's the ocean and the sea and all. And the waters which are above the expanse. That's space, where space is full of water. So, and again, I know they don't say that in the science books. They never taught you that in school. But there is a lot of evidence that space is actually made of water. And it's okay. I don't know if it's true or not, because I'm not a scientist, but the Bible seems to say that seems to be what the Bible is saying. So I'm inclined to believe it. And it is so. So that space we call the sky, or the atmosphere. And the Bible calls it the second heaven. And God calleth to the expanse heavens, and there is an evening, and there is a morning, day second. So all this is on the second day. And God saith, let the waters under the heavens be collected into one place, and let the dry land be seen. So when on day 2, when the expanse was first made, you couldn't really see land because it was still covered by the water underneath, which we today would call the ocean or the sea. And I believe there wasn't an ocean back then. There was only seas, but that's another story. And God calleth to the dry land earth, and to the collection of the waters he hath called seas. And God seeth that it is good. So this is day 3 that we're on now. And he has now moved the water off the land and separated it from the land so that you can see the difference between land and water. And he called the separated parts seas, not oceans. That's very important. But that's for another discussion. And God saith, let the earth yield tender grass, herb sowing seed, fruit tree, whose seed is in itself, making fruit after its kind on the earth, and it is so. So now, on the same day, which is day 3, God has revealed land, and he now has grass and herbs and fruit trees growing on the land. But we're going to have to remember that for later. And the earth bringeth forth grass, tender grass, herb sowing seed after its kind, and tree making fruit, whose seed is in itself after its kind, and God seeth that it is good. And there is an evening, and there is a morning, day 3. Now day 4. And God saith, let luminaries be in the expanse of the heavens, to make a separation between the day and the night. Then they have been for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Now, it does say that the sun, moon, and stars separate the day from the night, but it doesn't say that they create it or make it or have any control over it, because they don't. Remember, day and night were established on day 1. So maybe that was the rotation of the earth that was being established, or who knows what. Maybe there is a secondary light source that we're not aware of, because the sun is so bright that we don't even see the secondary light source or the original light source, because the sun is bright. Like, for instance, if I have a really bright light in front of me shining at the camera, you're not going to notice as much the light coming from behind, especially if I turn this so that you don't really see that lamp, those fixtures, the light fixture. And then if I put a bright light here, this is what you're going to focus on, is the bright light here. And you're going to go, whoa, that's too light. That's like us with the sun. Light existed on day 1, but then on day 4, God gave us the sun. So we always have our focus on the sun. What we don't realize is we don't need the sun to have day. We already have day. We had day on day 1. Okay. So they separate, meaning you can more easily tell, oh, this is day because I see the sun. This is night because I see the stars. So this is kind of like they signify or decorate the day and the night, but they don't establish the day and the night. The day and night is already there. And because of that, they also help us with the calendar. Now, here's the love of God that we're going to start seeing at this point. And they have been for luminaries in the expanse of the heavens, to give light upon the earth, and it is so. And God maketh the 2 great luminaries, the great luminary for the rule of the day, that's the sun, and the small luminary and stars for the rule of the night, that's the moon and stars. And God giveth them in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. Okay, so it's like there's 3 heavens, and that's probably why it's plural here, that are below the eternal heaven, which is where God lives. There is our atmosphere. No, wait. How should I put it? Our sky, okay, which is where the birds fly and the planes fly. Then there's our atmosphere, which is surrounding the earth, but it's dark. It's where darkness is. And then there is another heaven. Oh, above that, which we call space, where the sun, moon, and stars are. So those are the 3 heavens that are actually the one heaven. That are actually altogether called the second heaven in the Bible. And then the 3rd heaven is where God lives. Okay. All right. And there is an evening, and there is a morning, day 4. And God saith, let the waters teem with the teeming living creature, and fowl let fly on the earth on the face of the expanse of the heavens. Now we're in day 5. On day 4, God made the luminaries, the sun, moon, and stars. He doesn't make the fishes, the little fishes and the little birdies, until day 5. And God prepareth the great monsters and every living creature that is creeping, which the waters have teemed with, and after their kind, and every fowl with wing after its kind. And God seeth that it is good. And God blesseth them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and the fowl let multiply in the earth. And there is an evening, and there is a morning, day 5th. So the birds and the fishes were made on day 5, right the day after when the sun and the moon and stars were made on day 4. So this shows you the love of God, because he didn't make the animals who depend on the sun, moon, and stars for navigation. He didn't make them until after he made the sun, moon, and stars by which they could navigate. So that's the love of God. He has everything planned in order. He has a plan for us. So he won't bring you your husband or wife until you're ready to be a husband or wife. And you're in, and he's done everything else. He's got all your ducks lined up in a row, all the aspects of your life that needed to get cleared up and taken care of and settled before you get your spouse. He didn't create the birds and the fishes until he had already established their navigation charts in the skies. Isn't that wonderful? So he knows what he's doing. So we don't need to question him ever, knows what he's doing. So now he's got the navigation charts, the calendar set up, and then he makes the birds and the fishes. And God saith, Let the earth bring forth the living creature after its kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after its kind. And it is so. And God maketh the beasts of the earth after its kind, and the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. And God seeth that it is good. And God saith, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over fish of the sea, and over fowl of the heavens, and over cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that is creeping on the earth. And God prepareth the man in his image. In the image of God he prepareth him, a male and a female he prepareth them. Now that's important. But wait, let's go back to the sun worship for a second before we talk about this 6th day. Remember, we don't depend on the sun for day, and we don't depend on the sun for light. So we should not be worshiping the sun. There's a third thing we don't depend on the sun for. Remember back on day 2, what God created on day 2 and what sprung up on day 2? It was grass and herbs and trees. That means that grass, herbs, and trees were growing before the sun was created, because the sun was created on day 3. Oh my goodness. So the scientists told us our whole lives when we went to school that plants are dependent on the sun, but plants were growing before the sun. And we've been told our whole lives that we need the sun to live, that we can't live without the sun. Now, yes, the sun was created before man, but everything was created before man. And I think that is so that man would enjoy the full enchilada of God's creation once man was created, because man was the one thing that was created in God's image here on earth. So he wanted to show us everything beautiful. He wanted us to wake up to everything beautiful, not one thing missing. But our plants were growing before the sun. It actually said that on day 2. Let's go back to day 2. Blah, blah, blah. And the earth bringeth, this is verse 12, and the earth bringeth forth tender grass, herb sowing seed after its kind, and tree making fruit, whose seed is in itself after its kind. And God seeth that it is good. And there is an evening, and there is a morning, day 3rd. Now he created the sun on day 4 for navigation for the birdies and the fishies. But he didn't create the sun to grow plants or to grow birds and fish, just to help the birds and fish navigate. See how unimportant the sun is becoming? It's losing a lot of significance, isn't it? And it certainly should, because the sun is not to be worshipped. Now again, you can go to church anytime you want, including Sunday morning, and that's not a sin. But the people that wanted us to go to church on Sunday morning, it's because they worship the sun. That's why they set that up. But you and I don't worship the sun. We worship the S-O-N, the Son of God. Now, another thing that I've talked about before, and I don't have the verses here, but if you read the description of every temple in the body, in the Bible, every temple in the Bible, not only the temple at Revelation, King Solomon's temple, Moses's tabernacle, and everything in between. Guess which way the altar faces every single time. Guess which side you enter in every single time. The altar always faces east. Now you might say, well, that's sun worship. No, it's not. I'll tell you why. The altar always faces east. Faces east. The entrance to the temple is always on the east, so that when you enter the temple and you approach the sanctuary, guess where your bottom is? In the direction of the sun. Yes, sirree. Your bottom is in the direction of the sun. And if you were to bow down at the altar, where would your bottom be, your backside? At the sun. So again, the sun is losing so much significance in the Bible. The sun is nothing but a creation. Nothing but a creation. Now, there is a part in the Bible where God took, I don't remember what prophet it was. I don't remember. I think it might have been Ezekiel, but I'm not 100% sure about that. It could have been, it was either Ezekiel or Jeremiah. He took them in a vision to the temple, and he showed them that in one of the inner walls, the priests were actually giving sacrifices to pagan gods. And he also showed them that the priests were bowing down with their backside to God, facing the east. And that was a sin, because they were bowing down in the direction of the sun rather than giving their backside to the sun. So anyway, there we go. So now we're on day 6, and God does a whole lot of stuff on day 6, which he did a whole lot on all of the days. All of that was a lot. Incredible. But on day 6, he created the cattle, the creeping things, and the beasts. And God maketh the beasts of the earth after its kind, and the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. And God seeth that it is good. And then God says, let us make man in our own image, male and female. He prepared them. This is all on day 6. Do you know what this means? This means that Eve was created on day 6. She wasn't created later. See, I don't know why, but for a lot of my life, since Adam represents all of mankind, I understood that Adam was created on day 6, but I thought that maybe he and God spent a whole lot of time naming the animals, days and weeks and months, maybe even years before Eve was created. But I just realized the other day, Eve was created on day 6 because it does say male and female, he prepared them. Now this means that a whole lot of action happened on day 6. First of all, in the morning probably is when God made all the beasts of the land. Then God made Adam. Then God had Adam name all those beasts. Then, after Adam realized that he needed a mate, God made Eve. All on day 6. All of this happened on day 6. That's a lot of action on day 6. That's a lot. And that shows you that God did stuff in seconds. Boom, boom, boom. Really fast. It didn't take hours and years and months for the bear to form. It took seconds. Had to. And this is pretty amazing. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over fish of the sea and over fowl of the heavens and over every living thing that is creeping upon the earth. Now, he didn't say rule over all the systems of the world. He said rule over all the living. Notice this. And over every living thing that is creeping upon the earth. We're not commanded to rule over governments and art and finance and all those things that people of the Nine Mountain Mandate or whatever believe that we're to rule over. Now, I'm not trying to bash their faith, because if you pray for your finances, yes, that's a good thing. We should pray for our finances. But we're not commanded to rule over our finances. We're only commanded to rule over all the living creatures. That's all that God told us to rule over. He didn't tell us we have to rule over art. So we don't have to, as Christians, overtake the art world and demand that they do everything our way. That's not. For one thing, God doesn't give mandates. Governors do, which isn't even legal. God is God. He doesn't make mandates. Okay, He's God. He makes laws, and governors make mandates because governors can't make laws, and it's totally illegal for them to even make a mandate. So we're not to make mandates either. There's no mandate system. But I don't bash anybody's faith for praying over anything. You can pray for anything you want. That's perfectly biblical. But we're only commanded to rule over the living creatures. Okay? And God said, "Lo." So that takes a lot of pressure off your shoulders, doesn't it? It does mine too. I don't have to fix the art world or the world of finance. And God said, "Lo, I have given to you every herb sowing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree sowing seed. To you it is for food." So before man was created, everything else was created for our pleasure and for our well-being. It was all set in place. We had the animals to play with. We had the herbs and the fruit to eat. We had the sunshine to navigate if we were to walk, and to enjoy just the light from. And because the Bible does say they're light sources. And then we had the oceans, or the seas, not oceans, but we had the seas and the birds and everything else. It's pretty awesome. And every beast of the earth, and every fowl of the heavens, and to every creeping thing on the earth, which is breath of life. Oh, in which is the breath of life. Every green herb is for food, and it is so. So the herb is for all the animals, but man gets to eat the herbs and the fruits. That's what the Bible says. And God, now again, it's not a sin to eat meat, because God actually commanded, God gave us permission to eat meat the day that Noah came off the boat. That was when we got permission to eat meat. And when the Israelites went into the desert the night before, they were commanded to eat the lamb. That was a commandment from God. So it is not a sin to eat meat. Okay, but originally, the original perfect plan was that we only ate herbs and fruit. And God seeth all that he hath done, and lo, very good. And there is an evening and there is a morning, day 6. So on the seventh day, God rested, which shows you that most likely everything rested on the seventh day. If God was resting, how could anything else be working? You know what I mean? So the seventh day was just a beautiful day of rest and partying and restoration and happiness and joy. It was just amazing. Now, this gets interesting too. And at chapter 2, the heavens and the earth are completed, and all their host, and God completeth by the seventh day his work which he hath made, and ceaseth on the seventh day from all his work which he hath made. And God blessed the seventh day. Now, continuing on, in verse 4 it says, "These are births of the heavens and of the earth, and they're being prepared in the day of Jehovah, God's making earth and heavens." Now, that should have been the end of that chapter. That should have been the real end of chapter 1, but we're already in chapter 2, and it continues, so it makes it confusing. Because now we got a big look at all of creation, and now the Bible is going to focus in narrowly on the creation of man. So we're going back to the 6th day. It said that God rested on the 7th, but now the Bible is taking us back to day 6 with chapter 2, verse 5. We're going back to day 6. "And no shrub of the field is yet in the earth, and no herb of the field yet sprouteth. What? I thought you said on day 2. No, what was it? On day 2, God made the herb, the grass, and the tree sprout and grow. Yes, I did say that because it says it in chapter 1. So let's go back to chapter 1 where the herbs are growing. On day 2, verse 11, chapter 1, and God saith, let the earth yield tender grass, herb sowing seed, fruit tree, whose seed is in itself, making fruit after its kind on the earth, and it is so. And the earth bringeth forth, meaning it's growing, tender grass, herb sowing seed after its kind, and tree making fruit. This is all on day 2. But now it's taking us back to day 6 in chapter 2, verse 5, and saying, no shrub of the field is yet in the earth, and no herb of the field yet sprouteth. Well, I had to think about this for a long time, and I asked God to help me figure this out because I know God is not a liar, okay? And he doesn't play tricks with our mind. So both verses have to be true, but how can they be true? Well, this is what God showed me. In verse 5, the second half, it says, for, meaning because, Jehovah God hath not rained upon the earth, and a man there is not to serve the ground. Because remember, on day 6 was when the animals got made first, then Adam was made, then etc., etc. So after God made the animals, we're going back to day 6 after God made the animals, but he still hasn't made Adam. And it says there's no man to till the ground and there's no rain. Well, we know rain isn't going to show up until Noah shows up. And that's hundreds of years later. So this is horrible because it says no shrub of the field is on the earth and no herb of the field sprouted. But are we really going to wait hundreds of years until the flood to have shrubs and herbs? Especially when it already says they were growing on day 2. But here's what it is. The word field is very important here. It's very key. It says no shrub of the field. It doesn't say no shrub. And it says no herb of the field. It doesn't say no herb. On day 2, shrubs and herbs and trees were growing, and grass. All that was growing and alive before the sun was created. But all except for the field shrubs and the field herbs, because they depend on rain, which came after the flood, and they depend on enough men to be able to till the ground. So what he's talking about is no agricultural products. So there is herbs, there's the wild herbs like astragalus and ginger and mint and cumin and all the other wonderful wild herbs. And there's wild grass and there's trees with fruit in them. But the stuff that's grown for mass agricultural purpose isn't going to happen until after the flood when there's rain and there's enough men on the planet to have farms. So that would be simply the grapes. That's a shrub of the field. And anything else that's a shrub of the field, there's probably other stuff I don't know about. And then the herbs of the field would be the wheat, barley, rye, corn, all that stuff that you grow in mass, that you need rain and farmers to grow. So that stuff, so this must mean that Adam and Eve were not eating corn or wheat in the garden or grapes, but they were eating peaches and lettuce, for instance. Okay, so that clears that up. Now, a mist was going up from the earth because no rain is coming down, and hath watered the whole face of the ground. So there is water everywhere. But in order to grow agricultural crops, you need rain, you need heavy water, and you need it to come at specific times. So so you can't grow, I guess it's too hard to grow agricultural crops with just a mist coming up from the water, from the face of the earth. And Jehovah God formeth the man dust from the ground, and breath, and breathed into his nostrils breath of life, and the man becometh a living creature. Mentioned that what I learned from reading Genesis 1 and 2 is that God is a God of order. He knows exactly what he's doing. He has a perfect plan for each of us. He doesn't put us in a situation until he's already arranged everything that's needed for that situation. I've noticed before when God has told me to give money or resources to somebody or an organization, that I already had the money and resources before God asked me, and that it was no inconvenience or sweat to give it away. I've noticed that time and time and time again. And on the few occasions where I felt like I had to give when I didn't really have that much, it was still something that could be spared. I remember when I was like basically living in poverty for a couple of years because I was paying off my debt. So all my money went to my debt, and I had nothing, no money left over for groceries. Not one day did I ever actually, there was a lot of times I was hungry. There was a lot of times I didn't have all the food I wanted, but not one day passed where I never ate anything. Every single day, even if it was just a little bit of food, I always had food every single day during that entire 2 years. Not one day did I actually go hungry. And it was a miracle too. It was a total miracle, complete miracle. And I remember when I first moved to Tulsa, all I got was a part-time job that was like 14 hours a week at the most. And it was minimum wage, it was almost minimum wage, 14 hours a week. And I couldn't even hardly pay my rent with that money. And somehow, month by month, I was there for 5 months with that job, nothing but that job. But God brought me this lady into my life who wanted a private tutor for her children. So I ended up tutoring on the side. And between what that lady gave me and the measly amount of income I got from the part-time job, um, I was able to barely pay my bills every month. And and again, um, I always didn't have the food I wanted, but I never went hungry. I never actually had nothing to eat, not one day. Anyway, and that's in the hard times. The so-called hard times weren't even that hard, you know. But anyway, God has everything together. We're forbidden to worship the sun or to ever think for a moment that we're dependent on it. We're not. I know we got told our whole life by every teacher in school. We get told by the media, and we even get told by the church how dependent we are on the sun, but we're not. We're not. Even the plants we eat are not dependent on the sun. And I thought it was interesting. A year or two ago, I was looking into the idea of micro gardens. A lot of people have micro gardens, and they grow herbs and then they sell them to restaurants. And so I was watching some videos on that and some documentaries, and I found out that a lot of those gardeners, they don't need light to grow those herbs. They say we put it in the pot and then we cover the pot and we stick it on the shelf for a couple of weeks. And when we lift the lid, there the plants are. Beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And they didn't have 1 ounce of light. And I thought, well, that's really fascinating. How can a plant grow without light? Because I was told my whole life that plants need light. But then when I read here today or yesterday these verses, I'm like, well, that's how plants have always grown without light. They never needed light, contrary to what you were told in school. And now plants take advantage of the sun, just like I will take advantage of a lamb chop. If you place it before me, I'm going to eat that lamb chop, and I'll enjoy it, and I'll get lots of nutrients out of it. But I could live for the rest of my life without any red meat. I don't have to eat red meat to survive any more than a plant has to have sunlight to survive. But if we have it, we take advantage of it, you know, and it's good for us. So plants will turn their body toward the sun to take advantage of that energy that comes from the sunlight, but it's not necessary. So, um, Anyway, it's just pretty neat. I just love thinking about God and all the amazing things He's done. But we don't need the sun. We don't need anything that God made. We only need God. He's our only source of life. He's our only source of hope, our only source of happiness. You can have a spouse who loves you to the point where they would die for you and give anything to make your life better, where they would give you the clothes off their back and they would sacrifice anything for your happiness. Some people are married to spouses like that. God bless them. Some people have spouses like that. But even if you have a spouse like that, that spouse cannot make you happy. And I've heard stories of people who were loved to the death by their family members or their spouse, but they themselves were never happy. And they were suicidal, even though their spouse would do anything to make them happy. Why? Because happiness itself can only come from God. Fullness, wholeness, purpose can only come from God. It can't come from a person, no matter how much the other person tries. And that's why a lot of suicidal people have they're loved. They just can't feel it. They can't feel it because they can't feel it from God. Something is blocking them from feeling the love of God, and therefore the love from other people doesn't mean anything to them. There'll come a day. Well, actually, there was a time in Egypt when darkness fell over the land, but the Israelites had light. It was only the Egyptians who were in darkness, and it was so dark that it was painful. And Jesus said that some people will be cast into outer darkness, and it will be so painful that there will be not gnashing of teeth from the pain of the darkness. But God is light, and so um, when darkness fell over Egypt, God's people still had light. It didn't say, the Bible doesn't say they had lamps. It said they had light. Now, I don't know if they had lamps or not. All I know is their light came from God. And even if they didn't have lamps, they had light, you know? So we're not dependent on lamps any more than we're dependent on the sun. And it's just so amazing that when you read Genesis, you see how everything is because of God. Even day itself is only because of God. Light itself is only because of God, and light is God. You know, and just so amazing. I just can't get over it. So I just want to end this video with something that the Lord showed me a few years ago. Um, that the earth was created in 6 days, but to God a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. And which Peter points out in 2 Peter 3:8. He's quoting Psalm 94, but he's also expanding on it. Not only is 1,000 years like a day, but also a day is like 1,000 years to the Lord. And there's no difference theologically or spiritually, we should say. So remember, God spent 6 days creating all of the earth and everything in it. And he followed that with 1 day of rest. And then he started creating again. He spent 6,000 years. He's been spending 6,000 years creating his bride, creating and forming his bride, because many people had to be born over these 6,000 years that the earth has been in existence to become his bride. And he also has to create in each of us a brand new born again life. So he's been remember when Jesus, I should have also quoted the verse in the New Testament, but you can look it up, where Jesus says, when the Pharisees confronted him for healing on the Sabbath, he said to them, I work on the Sabbath because my Father has never stopped working. And so I think this is what Jesus is talking about. Ever since that 1 day of rest that God had, he has never stopped working because he's spent 6,000 years creating his bride.
And that will be followed by 1,000 years of peace. And peace means rest. So the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the millennial reign, will be a Sabbath rest. So that's what the Lord showed me, which means we're very close because we have been in existence for approximately 6,000 years. Nobody knows exactly how many years we've been in existence. And maybe God never wanted us to know exactly. Maybe God prevented us from knowing, because even when you study the Bible, you can't know precisely to the year how long we have been in existence. And the scientists, of course, can't agree. And maybe God didn't want us to know because, again, He doesn't want us to know when Christ is coming. But we do know Christ is coming very, 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 very soon, because we do know we're really close to the 6,000 years. Some people say more, some people say less. I say less because Christ hasn't come yet. So, anyway, hope that blesses you.